For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Hi, I'm Surya Gangadharan and welcome to another edition of The Gist. This evening we are going to look at Iran in the context of the developments we've seen over the last few months. Basically, the demonstrations we've seen in major cities all over Iran against the hijab. But is there something more to this? Because we've seen these demonstrations happen in Iran in previous years. Nothing seems to have actually come out of that. And for that reason, we're going to try and probe exactly what's going on and try and understand the developments there. I have with me Dr. Ramin Jahanbegloo. He's a well-known Iranian academic based in India. He is a writer, he is an author and commentator on developments in his country. Dr. Jahanbegloo, great to have you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Dr. Jahanbegloo, you're now you're talking to us from Canada. Um, Tell me, I mean, it's now early in the year. We've seen these developments in Iran over the last few months. What is your sense of what these demonstrations represent? What are they all about? How do we understand it?
Well, I think that it's important for people who are following us to understand that these protests have been going on at least for 40 years in Iran. I would say every 5 years we have had rebellions, we have had social unrest, and not only at the level of students, but also at the level of teachers, feminist organizations. So, of course, in 1999 and 2009, we have had also like what we have today, a very long days of protests and a lot of violence coming from the side of the Iranian state towards students and towards the protesters. So it has to do with the fact that I think there are several levels that we need to understand, and I try to explain them very quickly. First of all, what we are witnessing right now in Iran is actually a kind of a feminist revolution, I would say. And I use the word revolution because it is bringing a revolution of values in the Iranian civil society. So, and women have been protesting practically 2 months after the Islamic regime came to power in 1979. So that's a long period of time for women. Secondly, we have in this what we have been witnessing for the past 4 months are youngsters. So it's also a movement of youth, like we had it in France in 1968, for example, asking for changes in the society. And thirdly, it's a bigger movement actually, where you have intellectuals and artists participating, and also people from middle classes and lower middle classes who are not very satisfied with the management of the economy and the politics and what's been going on for 40 years in Iran. So there are all these levels of, I think, intent which have been there, and we have to take them into consideration when we're talking about what's going on in Iran today.
Mm-hmm. So, what you're telling me is that these represent different demands and largely leaderless. Is that what it is?
Different demands, yes. If the demands coming from the youth is, I would say, mostly based on values, and hijab being one of them, actually, for the young women, that they don't want to wear it anymore, and they've been asking long time not wearing it. But also demands for a better management of the economy coming from, let's say, teachers or workers and lower social classes, and and a full political dissatisfaction coming from the elites, meaning that they want an end to the Iranian theocracy, and they want more democracy. I mean, democracy, not more democracy. They want democracy actually, because we've been living with a tyranny for the past 44 years. And so, yes, I mean, there are several levels of discontent, which I would formulate them as being a manners of being against the Iranian state, but also trying to show that reform is what the solution for that the reformists are suggesting is not actually valid anymore. And what we need a change in the constitution, we need a change in the regime. And of course that's where you see slogans like "down with the dictator" or "down with Khamenei," meaning that the people are asking, at least those who are on the streets, they're asking for the end of theocracy in Iran.
Would you say these are being guided, directed, as the regime says, from outside? Or is it largely leaderless, something which is driven by social media?
Oh no, this is a huge nonsense, and it's very unfortunate that my some of my Indian friends, they repeat that, because there is no conspiracy actually there, and this conspiracy theory has been going on. It was there already in 2009. And I remember when I gave talks with my for my leftist Indian friends, like the Indian Communist Party, they used to say, "No, the Americans are behind it." I said, "You don't know anything about Iran when you're saying that, because neither the Americans nor the Israelis are in the hearts and minds of all these young people who are shouting for more liberty and are shouting for women's rights and human rights. They don't know anything about that because they have not lived it, and they are not politicians, or they are not politicized as you think. So we are not in this paradigm of the Cold War that we are repeating. Actually, it's a very simple equation. I think the equation goes like we have it also in India. We had it with the farmers. Uh, People are asking for more social justice. People are asking for a better management of the Iranian economy. They are asking for less theocracy. They are asking for more democracy. So it's the same formula that we had in Latin America. But we have to understand that the Iranian regime is a semi-totalitarian regime. So they are very good in they making their propaganda, and it's quite a strong regime in the Middle East and in its I would say in its contacts and diplomatic relations in West Asia and South Asia. We can see it in the relations that Iran has with India. The discourse coming outside from the Iranian state is that, okay, look at all these protesters. They have been paid by the Americans or the Israelis, or they actually want to topple the regime and to replace or take us toward a kind of a civil war, which is not the case at all. I have to say that we have to have another reading of the protests in Iran, because those who are watching our dialogue, actually, or the interview, they have to understand that something like 20,000 people have been arrested, 510 have been killed. You have you yourself, you do work of journalism, something like 60 journalists are in prison, a lot of young people, and we have had already 4 death sentences, and I mean four young people of 18 and 20, in their 18 and 20s, they have been hanged. So we're dealing with a state which uses a lot of violence against its own people. But when we come to diplomacy and the image that Iran wants to give out of itself outside the Iranian state, wants is that these protesters have been paid by the Americans or by the Israelis, and they are not true Iranians.
Are you saying this is leaderless?
Yes, it has no leader. The movement, as we see, has no leader. It's very similar to the movement that we had in Serbia against Milosevic, which was actually toppled Milosevic, but had no leaders. You had nonviolent groups like Otpor, but you had no leaders. And in Iran, it's the same thing. There are no leaders. I tell you why. Because first of all, if there are leaders, the leaders are outside Iran, who pretend to be, or to be some of them pretend to be the leaders. But those who are inside Iran, actually, they are not following. They don't want to be leaders, and they cannot be leaders. And we have people, portions from different. I would say people from individuals from different portions of the population who don't get to see each other, or and in different cities of Iran, they might demonstrate without knowing each other. Actually, what's happening in Kurdistan or in Balochistan has nothing to do with what's happening in Tehran. They know about each other through the TV satellites, but the internet is down. And so it's very difficult to do it as they used to do it with, like, by tweeting or going through the Instagram. But they really don't know each other. I think that the students who they might, some of them get to know each other as students, but they don't know the other demonstrators.
Do you think the regime is divided in its approach to these demonstrations?
Yes, let me say one thing first, which I think is very important. The Iranian regime is suffering from a legitimacy crisis. That's for sure. And I think that we are at the point of non-return. I'm not the point of non-return, meaning that the way Iranian regime was dealing with its own institutions and with the people of Iran before these demonstrations and protests, it will not continue on the same path. It's going to be totally different. Even if the protests fade away, I think that the dissent is going to continue. The anger is going to be there. The Iranian state has to take into consideration all these what has been happening in Iran, and it will have a lot of repercussions, I think, internationally. So it's certainly, the regime is divided in the sense that its institutions are somehow working against each other, and some of the professors who have been actually some of the professors of the universities who had their jobs for more than 30 years, they became dissenters, or they actually came out and criticized the regime, and now the regime is asking them to leave their jobs, some of them. So it shows that we are not just divided between dissidents and people of the regime. We are inside the regime itself. There is a lot of dialogue, critique, I would say. I think that everybody is thinking about what's going to happen if tomorrow Ayatollah Khameinei, the supreme guide of the revolution, dies. I don't think that anybody can replace him. Also, I think that those who are listening to us or watching us, they have to understand that the Revolutionary Guards in Iran have always been a very important force, actually, military force, but also political force and economic force, because they control practically they are the ones who control the economy of Iran, and they are behind the scene, but they are controlling practically everything. So there's a lot of tension between them as militaries and also I would say some people working for the foreign ministry, for example, because it's not exactly the same attitude towards the future of Iran. As we saw with Soleimani and others coming from the Revolutionary Guards, they are mostly they were thinking about the Iranian hegemony in the Middle East, which is not certainly the case for non-militaries inside Iran. They were thinking more today. I would say very quickly, those who are non-militaries and they don't belong to the Basij, to the paramilitary forces, or to the Revolution Guards, they are thinking in terms of getting to a nuclear accord, a nuclear deal with the Europeans and the Americans.
So, where is the army in this? Is it separate from the Revolutionary Guard?
No, the army, there is no such thing as a classical army. We have to understand that. It's we're living a time like the French Revolution. The army was completely in 1979 was completely put away and controlled replaced by the Revolutionary Guard, especially during the war against Saddam Hussein of Iraq. And today, I think that most of those who are controlling, I mean, the generals, as they call themselves, or the people who are at the head of the Revolutionary Guards, and they control the army. So we have no such thing as a classical army, which can come out and play a role against the Revolutionary Guards. Actually, the military system of the Iranian regime is based on a totalitarian schema, or a totalitarian plan. Is a little bit like the Nazis or the fascists they used, or in the Soviet Union we had it during Stalin. It's very much controlled by the guide himself, by the supreme guide, who is directly in touch with them, and not we don't go through, for example, a Ministry of War like we have it, or Ministry of Defense as we call it today, in democratic countries. It doesn't function like in India, for example. It doesn't function like in France or in Germany or in any other place. It functions actually in a very typical totalitarian way, meaning that at the top you have the supreme guide, then immediately you have the security forces and the paramilitary and the Revolutionary Guards, and then you have the government. Government is practically without any power. So most of the decisions, like, for example, giving death sentences to these young people in the prisons, it goes through the judiciary. But who controls the judiciary? The supreme guide controls the judiciary. So it's very important to understand this pyramid of power, how it works in Iran.
So, there is a view that in countries like Iran and many others, change can only come from the top, not from the bottom up. Do you agree?
I don't fully agree. I think that it depends how long this change is going to take. If it's we can have revolutions in this kind of countries also, but I mean, what you say is not wrong. I mean, sometimes it comes from the top, and sometimes when there is no leadership. For example, this is one of the questions that everybody is asking: if tomorrow the supreme guide of the revolution, Ayatollah Khameinei, he passes away, who is going to replace him? Because it was already very difficult to replace Ayatollah Khomeini himself, in 1989. I don't think that there's going to be a true replacement, and there is also one other factor which plays, and that's the Revolutionary Guards. They don't need the mullahs. They can I repeat that many times in my articles in India and elsewhere. They don't really need the mullahs at this stage. Because they can change the constitution of Iran. They can, because constitution is based is a theocratic constitution. They can make it a military constitution. They can make it we can have a formula like in Pakistan during Zia, for example, meaning a mixture of Islam, Sharia Islam, and a military. And that can replace the theocracy very easily.
You think that's a good idea, replacing the theocracy with a military regime?
No, that's not a good idea for me. I'm a dissident, I'm an intellectual, so I for me, is the good idea is that we have democracy in Iran, and the total replacement of this kind of regimes. But I think that this nobody is thinking of it inside the Iranian regime as a good or bad idea. It might be a necessity for them to do it, to control things, both internally and externally. Because as I told you, and as we see it, and I'm sure that you and your colleagues, know that quite well, who's in control of Iran's foreign policy? Revolutionary Guards. I mean, it was Mr. Soleimani, for example, who was dealing with Iranian proxies in Lebanon, in
Yeah.
Iraq, in Syria. Iran was backing Bashar Assad in Syria. Iran is backing the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran is backing the Shiite groups in Iraq. So who is in contact with them? Immediately in contact with them, the Revolutionary Guards, and that shows that. But for the time being, they need to have legitimacy, and they need to have some kind of the regime itself has to have links at different institutions. So the Supreme Guide and his entourage, what they do is to create, this balance among all these different institutions. But once he's not there anymore, this balance is not needed. We need a new balance, and I think that new balance is not going to be civil; it's going to be military.
So, assuming some military guy takes over, I mean, it may be something like Pakistan or perhaps Egypt, one of those.
Yes, with some exception. No, I'm not going to say like Egypt, Al-Sisi, and others, because more or less Al-Sisi is he follows the path of people like Nasser, Sadat, and Mubarak.
Yeah.
But he's in the same, he has followed the same path militarily and in his own life. In Iran, it's going to be different because we're going to have. First of all, Revolutionary Guards are not unified, also as we think. I think that there is a lot of disagreement among themselves. But nevertheless, if they think, especially the top level of the Revolutionary Guards, if they think that they can have to control the country, and because they say it, and they have, even in the past, they have written letters to the president Khatami and others saying that if you cannot control the country, we're going to come out and control it. And this time again, they showed that they asked people to go back to their homes. Nobody asked them to write this kind of letter or to come and say these things, but they think that they are legitimate so they do so. So I think that in the back of their minds, it's the fact that, well, if these Ayatollahs cannot control Iran, we're going to do that. And we're going to do that military. And one of the things that puts fear in my heart is that they can very easily, if they see that they cannot control things, they can push Iran into a kind of internal war, civil war, with all these minorities, ethnic minorities that we have, like the Baluchis, and in that sense, they can control it better because maybe the Russians are going to get involved, the Syrians might get involved, the Iranian proxies might get involved. People of Iran, they already think that to shoot Iranians, you need to have non-Iranians. So many among the rumors that you can hear from the people of Iran is that no, some of these soldiers who are shooting on people, they come from Iraq or Lebanon, and they're the Hezbollah. They're not Iranians. So the mentality is that, well, these proxies are collaborating with the Revolutionary Guards, and the Revolutionary Guards, they have the monopoly of violence in Iran, which is true.
You mentioned democracy, Has Iran ever known democracy? I mean, does an Iranian understand what democracy is, how it is practiced, how difficult it is?
Yes, Iran is one of the rare countries in the Middle East and West Asia which had two revolutions in one century. Two revolutions and one coup d'etat in 1953 against Mossadegh. Well, Mossadegh was a liberal, so you had a nationalist government. Many people didn't like Mossadegh in Iran, but he had some followers, and he was a liberal, and a lawyer. And in the constitutional revolution of Iran was also a liberal constitution. I mean, and the constitutional revolution was actually asking for justice and freedom and liberal ideas. And it was very much influenced by all these ideas of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and others. Iranians never lived truly a democracy, but they've lived moments of freedom, very short moments, maybe 1 year, 2 years, a very short period and before the coup d'etat of 1953, a very short moment just after the Iranian Revolution of 1978, 79, for a few months. So they could practice politically and intellectually a kind of a freedom. But that's it.
Mhm. So, last question. What do you foresee over the next couple of months? Continuation of the current demonstrations, firing, executions? Do you see any signs of outreach by the regime?
No, I think that the protests might fade and are fading already, but the
Mm.
discontent and dissent are going to continue and they're going to remain. I think that what the Iranian judiciary is planning to do is to push, first of all, continue with some death sentences. As I said, they have already done it with 4 people, 4 young people. And
Yeah.
that is because they want to put fear and create fear among the young people so they will not come out on the streets, and that's also is one of the ways that they're going to do that. And otherwise, I think we're going to have some confessions coming from the prisoners, which are
Mhm.
already there, so kind of a theatrical trials and
Yeah.
show trials, as we say. And some people are going to confess that they have been paid by Americans or Israelis or by foreigners and this and that. These are not going to change anything. I think that the discontent is going to continue. Iran and internationally, I have to tell you, despite the fact that when you're sitting in India, you think that everything is going well with the Iranian regime. I think that the
Mhm.
Iranian regime is going to have many difficulties in its foreign policy, especially with the Europeans. First of all, the nuclear deal is not going to be signed, I don't think. And I don't think they're going to get back to sit down and talk to each other. It's not going to be very easy for Europeans and Americans to do that. And therefore, I think we have to wait for another crisis, and this crisis is going to be inside the regime, not on at the level of the
Mhm.
streets, because Iran is certainly, the Iranian regime is going to think of a new management for itself. Uh, if Ayatollah Khamenei dies in the next few months, that's going to be a huge crisis, and everything is going to change. I don't know. I mean, he's sick, but nobody knows if when he's gonna pass away.
Mhm. There's the absence of any comment from India. I mean, how do you see that?
Sorry.
The absence of any comment from India on the
Yes.
demonstrations there.
Well, I mean, it's very Indian, if I can say that, because India is thinking, and India was right, because India has always been thinking of its own interests.
Yeah.
So, in many cases, India, in its foreign policy, remains neutral, and including Iran. And when they have to vote, for example, they will not vote yes or no; they vote always neutral.
Yeah.
And I think that there is the Chabahar project, and there are many other projects, and also Iranians, they suggest to India always that they can help them eventually against all Islamist menace. And I think that the Indian government, especially this government, the Modi government, they buy it very easily. They say, okay,
Mhm.
if Iranians have a lot of proxies around the world, so they can certainly help us against all these Sunni
Mhm.
to fight these Sunni Islamists or jihadists, like the takeover movement coming from Pakistan or elsewhere. And
Yeah.
we know, I mean, somebody who lives in India and works in India like me knows that this is a very sensitive thing for especially the Indian state, but also for the Indian population. So India will continue, I think, its neutrality towards Iran. They don't want to get involved with any sides. But at the
Mhm.
same time, they also work with the enemies of Iran. which are the Americans and some of the Europeans. And I think this is because of India's interests. So each country, each state is working for its own interests and not for the interests of the others. But let me just add that I've said that before. This is the Indian state, but the Indian civil society, meaning the intellectuals and artists and the elites, they can actually act in favor of Iranian people, and they can act in the favor of Iranian descent or Iranian civil society, and they don't do that. And they have not done that. This is one in the Indian elites have been among the rare elites in the world who, if you go and talk to them, for example, with Indian feminists, they would say, yes, we back them, but they have not signed any petition. Practically, I'm close friends with many Indian artists and Indian intellectuals, and I have not seen them coming out. Like the French and the Germans and the Scandinavians and some of the Americans. They came out and they actually showed their sympathy and solidarity with the protests. But in India, we didn't have that at all. But I think in the future it's going to change. I hope so.
Hope for the best.
Yes.
The cruel world otherwise.
Absolutely.
Dr. Jahanbegloo, thank you very much for your time.
Very much.
And glad to have spoken to you. We'll continue this conversation, I'm sure, at some further point down the road. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And for those of you who joined us on this chat, do subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram. Thank you and good night.